Welcome. I'm Alex Novarese, Editor-in-Chief of Legal Business and the in-house lawyer magazine, and I'm here today to chair a debate on one of the key issues keeping General Counsel awake at night, data security. Only if we could get your view for the moment, you're coming at obviously not from a legal perspective, but technology and implementing changes. How, from your experience, how adept are sizable companies at dealing with data management, regulation, and avoiding, blow-ups?
Blow-ups, yeah. Well, I think in terms of dealing with breaches, if that might be a blow-up, for example, or a lost laptop, I think organisations, in my experience, have typically tended to just turn immediately to the IT department, because they recognise that the technology for them is a tool and they've got a team of people who understand it. Yeah. But I think as we've seen the emergence of new ways of collaborating with your clients and other businesses using software as a tool, new ways to buy your resources as a service instead of software and license and a shelf and so on, the risks that businesses are facing in terms of data loss, data leak, data hack, data breach and so on are increasing every single day. My focus is on those tools rather than the business approach to the legal regulation and so on and the ICO. Because any organisation that feels just because there's a patch Tuesday coming from Microsoft and that's going to lock down the latest flaw in the Edge browser or something and wants to feel some comfort there, for every one of those that's happening, there's a new vulnerability coming out with bring your own device policies in corporations and so on. So I think organisations do really well to think, as Raj has mentioned, about the kind of risk tools that they have and expand them to software risk analysis tools for their organisation as well that can help them to understand the risks and then communicate those across their business. And if they can look at a good way to create a programme of education across the entire enterprise, then that also sort of helps to share the risk across business units, business managers, and so on, and educates every endpoint. Every member of staff is an endpoint. Sure. That sounds a bit odd, doesn't it, from a technology person? But we do call everyone users as well. And I think the only other industry that does that is the drug industry. So.
Does that make you pushers or?
Well, we do talk about pushing software to users as well. It probably doesn't sound very good either.
I'm going to bring Stewart in on this point. There's obviously a lot more pressure on legal teams to have a feel or some sort of a sense of the technicalities of this. I know you feel that the regulators get a bum rap in that they're much more advanced in many cases than the legal teams or some of the people in private practice. How confident are you that if you look at a large PLC and that you have the technology team and the legal team that they're communicating? Because I would have thought, call me a cynic, they are not natural allies or bedfellows. Is that unfair of me?
No, I don't think it's unfair. The proposition is that the legal team and the technology team or the security team are not communicating properly. That's a proposition. I think it's right. What we see is good quality tactical level communication from time to time. There's no doubt about that. So if there was a flare-up, to use the phrase we talked about before, if there was a breach or an incident and it was handled, as Tony said, in the IT department, you would understand in a tactical sense pretty quickly it would get to legal if the parameters are right. So we know that it will happen. So there's that conversation going on, tactical level conversation between legal and security, technology, etc. But the strategic conversation is almost wholly lacking in business. So the sense, where do we sit as a community, a diverse community of experts with particular roles and responsibilities, where do we sit in the context of a clear vision for security and privacy? That strategic question is not really addressed, and therefore the communication levels on strategy are incredibly poor. And what we then see is the manifestation of that, which is the first time that security is properly conversed about is in incident, is in breach, rather than in prevention and detection, etc. So you've got those ideas, Alex. I think that the big challenge for General Counsel is to understand the role that they can play to facilitate that strategic conversation. A mistake for General Counsel would be to get stuck in the tactical piece and try and turn themselves into some kind of quasi-legal cyber hero. And lawyers, many of us, myself included perhaps, we do have a tendency through the nature of our roles and our positions to want to lead. Yeah. And you could see how we could, through that characteristic, assert leadership in a security situation. And that's not the position that's going to be a fruitful one for General Counsel or for their businesses or for cybersecurity and vulnerability going forward. What we need to have is a facilitator of strategy rather than a superhero in a tactical situation.
Sure. So you're saying it's not realistic for them to try and be some sort of a Renaissance man covering all these things?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Well, just very quickly, what would be the practical solutions of how they could either try and build up that experience, presumably inside the legal team, or perhaps more realistically work with either a technology team or a data security team? What would be one or two obvious steps that you would say, yeah, that's good hygiene, that's what a general counsel should be doing?
Yeah, so if you were to look at the question of threat and vulnerabilities, that's already come through. So threat and vulnerability analysis and understanding how that transmogrifies into a business and a legal idea is a thing that could be done very, very quickly and facilitated by General Counsel. So rather than we as General Counsel will perform threat and vulnerability analysis, we would have a privileged position in the organisation with access to the board. We would have a privileged authority. We are lawyers. There is law here. Our companies treat legal issues seriously. We would have the ability to take those materials and those ideas and take to the board and say, look, what we can do and what we ought to do is really understand our threat and vulnerability. Let's look at that in a holistic sense and understand what that means for our priorities in business. I mean, that would be a thing that General Counsel, using all the things that Raj mentioned before, the tools and the skills and the insight, would be well adept to lead a conversation on in a business. And I think that would be a great starting place if you talked about hygiene.
But presumably they would need to do that in partnership or with the CISO?
Exactly right. They would need to reach out into the business and make sure that the right stakeholders are engaged and bring them forward in a way that we could start to look at threat and vulnerability. So it's the privileged access and the authority of law that gives the General Counsel that ability to be a leader on that, not a techie superhero on something tactical.
Could I give you an example of what actually both Stewart and Tony have just illustrated? Yeah. Tony raised a very, very interesting point about behaviour in an organisation and culture and training and education. And that is an area where lawyers actually have legal training. They understand the framework and can actually help to drive a particular agenda. So using that as an illustration, at British Gas, we have actually been in the process of building a customer data handling package. Yeah. And that has involved me taking the lead, talking with people from information security, but also talking to my colleagues from learning and development to say, right, what is actually the right content that we want to put in this kind of training? What message do we want to land? What is the medium? Yeah. Because lots of companies think they can tick the box in this area simply by putting an online module on and deploying it. And my experience of that is it gets you a tick in the box, and it might get you, you can track it, and it might get you 99% of your employees covered. But fundamentally, to Tony's point, Stuart's point, it won't actually change the way your organisation thinks about data, handling it, securing it, protecting it. And so you can draw on the expertise of others to say, how do I build a holistic program to drive the awareness? So one of the things we have done is said, okay, we'll have the online module because that is good practice. But really good practice would be to build on that and to get our leaders to own this. Because exactly as Tony said, it shouldn't be the preserve of lawyers, it shouldn't be the preserve of tech, it shouldn't be the preserve of the CIO. Yeah. It actually should be owned in and managed by the business, because it is ultimately their problem when this stuff goes wrong. And so what we've focused on is things such as tone from the top, communications, incentives. What incentives do you put in your employees? Plans. And we've started to think about that much more broadly. So that actually will focus the attention of employees on this pretty critical issue.
Sure.
And there's nothing particular.
Could you just
So objectives can be set. So at the moment, I would imagine that most people in an organisation will have, very commercially focused objectives.
Yeah.
But in essence, there's no reason why those objectives couldn't also sweep up good conduct. And good conduct might well include adhering to particular standards of managing information or promoting key messages, cascading key messages, and then you can actually assess people's performance at the end of the year. Once you start to build those sorts of objectives in, you start to change the culture of an organisation. And that's where actually lawyers can play a pretty critical role. There's nothing inherently unusual in that. It's just a different topic. I think we probably all do it in all sorts of different areas, in all other areas of risk, whether it's anti-bribery, competition, there are any number of areas. This is just another strand. It's another strand that we have to manage. And it's the same framework that you apply.